Thanks to his frequent cringe-inducing gaffes, Richard Madeley is often compared to Steve Coogan's fictional TV host, Alan Partridge. An interview he conducted with Keir Starmer was no exception. Here, Madeley grills the Labour leader about reports he's sidelining Angela Rayner.
As it was reported in several Sunday newspapers yesterday, from well-placed sources, that you are now sidelining Angela Rayner, your deputy, because of her comments about Tory scum, that you found those embarrassing, and obviously in the light of the terrible events that happened 2 Fridays ago, incredibly poorly timed, and that you're actually keeping her out of sight. And bringing other people forward. Is that true?
That's not true. Every Sunday I get all of the newspapers and I faithfully go through them and read lots of things that are apparently happening that bear no relation to the truth.
So she's still your best girl, is she?
Well, look, what I would say in all seriousness is that Angela Rayner's had a bereavement of a very, very close person to her, someone that she treated more or less as her mother. And so she's had a very bad and hard week last week, and she's got a funeral coming up in relation to that. So her absence is actually to do with that bereavement rather than anything else. But as I say, I enjoy reading the papers and hearing all sorts of stories that bear no relation to the truth.
She's still your best girl, is she? About Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party. Have you ever heard someone ask Boris Johnson if Michael Gove or Dominic Raab is his best boy? Well, I'd say it's completely bizarre. It's also, of course, incredibly sexist. It also seems odd to me to accuse Angela Rayner of bad timing in her scum comments. The implication is to relate those comments to the tragic death of David Amess, but Angela Rayner isn't clairvoyant. She didn't know what events would unfold in the weeks after she made that speech, and more importantly, absolutely no one who is remotely intelligent has suggested that David Amess's killer was inspired by Angela Rayner complaining about the Tories cutting benefits. There's no relation between these two events. They have nothing to do with each other, and it just seems quite slanderous to be connecting them. The next part of the interview is even more farcical. Remember, the reason Angela Rayner is under fire is because she said the Tories were scum. It was an uncivil way to talk about her opponents. Now pay attention to how Madeley, in the next breath, spoke about the Labour left.
What about an exclusion zone for the hard left on your party? Some of the criticism you got after conference a couple of weeks ago was that you basically didn't seize the opportunity to give them a good kicking and to make it absolutely clear that the days of the Corbynistas, as we might call them, is well and truly over.
Well, look, I had the first few days of conference, everybody saying, why on earth is he taking these rule changes to change his party? Surely this is not the time, etc. We had massive rule changes in relation to the leadership of the Labour Party, in relation to reselection of MPs and anti-Semitism, made a huge difference. And everybody that was criticising me on the way in, saying, why are you doing this, recognised that we changed the party for the better on that Sunday in conference. And then I followed up with my conference speech, and anybody who saw that, and I realise not everybody did, will have seen that there were a few hecklers, but actually the vast majority of people in the room, vast majority of members, actually did my job for me, which was to shut the hecklers up. And the slogan I used, the push-down I used, was to say, chanting slogans or changing lives. And that's the choice the Labour Party has to make. We can sit on the sidelines protesting, or we can be fit for government and go into government. And the second is the choice we have to make.
So in case the rules weren't already clear to you, civility politics, to be civil in British political discourse, means you can never call the Tories scum, but you can call for the left to get a good kicking. We've got one more update from the Civility in Politics gang, and it's from the same article in the Mail on Sunday that Madeley was referring to there. The move to sideline Rayner comes amid claims that the party's right is making coordinated efforts to push Sir Keir into their camp and banish the unelectable left. Sources say right-winger Wes Streeting told a shadow cabinet meeting, "Every day we should drag a sacred cow of our party to the town marketplace and slaughter it until we are up to our knees in blood." Bizarre metaphor. Ash, this is the problem with civility politics, isn't it? When it comes to talking about centrist establishment politicians, we're all expected to wear kid gloves. When it comes to the left or socialists, anything goes.
I want to talk about the civility politics in just one moment, but perhaps I'd like to draw your attention to something, which is the look on Keir Starmer's face when Richard Madeley was saying, you know, you missed your opportunity to give the left a good kicking, he was like, no, I really did. 3 bags full, sir. I really kicked the shit out of them. There was this element, which I've never really seen so nakedly in Keir Starmer before, of ego and of feeling quite pleased when he's able to demonstrate what I think is quite limited, perhaps even toxic model of masculinity, where you feel like a big man through your put downs and your ability to dominate other people. And when it's sort of wrapped up in this kind of, you know, hierarchical bullying kind of persona. Now, there's something quite pathetic in that as well. I don't think anyone looks at Keir Starmer and go, you, son, you're the man to take on Tyson Fury in Las Vegas. There's something kind of pathetic in that hint of ego. It's the person who wants to suck up to the even bigger bully by talking about how they flushed somebody's head down the toilet just last week, except you wouldn't know them because they moved to a different school. And I think there's something in there which I found, if I'm honest, quite nauseating, just something in that little flash of the facial expression and the nature of the response. But you're perfectly right to highlight the inherent hypocrisy of the civility conversation, which is, on the one hand, you can draw this totally fictitious connection between Angela Rayner and the brutal murderer of David Amos. We've got absolutely no evidence that the murderer of David Amos was an anonymous troll on Twitter. That's, of course, been another big conversation. No evidence that he's a big supporter of Angela Rayner or particularly influenced by her. And yet, what this has done, this tragic and brutal murder, which has to be, I think, investigated and looked at on its own terms, is now served as a pretext for political purposes, where people can essentially dress up their own feeling of coming under fire, which is the nature of oppositional politics, and saying this is practically akin to attempted murder. And there's something, I think, incredibly cynical about that and what's going on. And then you've got this third element, which is the way in which talking about the left is suffused by the language of violence. Give them a good kicking, bury them in a tomb. This stuff about, slaying the sacred cow of the party until you're up to your knees in blood. Well, if you want to look at targets of political violence over the last, 5 years, you've had Jo Cox, who was murdered by a far-right activist because she was seen as too left-wing and too kind to refugees and, too accepting of migrants. You've also had the, attack on Owen Jones on his birthday. I've also been with Owen when we've both been chased around by the far right looking to, in Richard Madeley's words, give us a good kicking. And thinking about the abuse that I've suffered, where some of them have been very credible threats of violence. Now, it's one thing for the far right to entertain some of those violent and bloodthirsty fantasies, but it's quite another to hear it coming from people who are seen as the custodians of respectable and sensible opinion. Now, I would go as far to say that, this isn't really a double standard in politics. This is just the one standard, which is cozy up to the far right if it means, kind of getting the left out of any proximity to power, and do whatever you can to delegitimize, monster, and indeed endanger the left, because ultimately they're going to be more of a threat to your interests than the far right ever will. Because there are plenty of people, I think, within the Labour Party who are more concerned with their own jobs, maintaining them within the party, than they are winning an election with the party under a left-wing leadership. And I think that that's all there is to it.
I mean, beyond the hypocrisy, another thing to mention is just how bad an electoral strategy this is. The Labour Party are thinking that there's a cost of living crisis. Universal credit has been cut by £20. We're in the middle of a climate crisis. And what Wes Streeting, who, by the way, is the right's candidate to replace Keir Starmer, now they're all egging for him, he thinks that Labour's priority should be going to drag sacred cows of our party to the town marketplace and slaughter them until we're up to our knees in blood. No one cares. That was the other problem with that interview with Keir Starmer. He was like, should you give the left a good kicking? And Keir's like, no, actually, I did give them a bit of a kicking. It's sort of like, why don't you say, I'm not sure your audience actually really care about the internal party politics of the Labour Party. And what I'm here to talk about is the cost of living crisis, is the hike to national insurance, is the fact that loads of people are going to be poorer because of the £20 cut to universal credit. There's no message discipline because they don't believe in anything other than bashing the left.
And I'm sorry, but look at the kind of moral leadership you see from somebody like Marcus Rashford, right? He's a footballer. He's a young guy. Standing up for the poor and the dispossessed is not his job, right? That's not his job. And yet he has got this laser-like focus on the issue that he wants to talk about all the time. He doesn't seem like somebody who's caught up in, such petty rivalries. And he is a footballer. Petty rivalries is literally his job. I think there's something which is so unstrategic about the way in which, Keir Starmer and, Wes Streeting and all the rest of them have essentially gone, panting over this, imitation carrot of, oh, you'll get some approval if you're seen to be punching left. Well, look, you might have Richard Madeley rolling about at your feet, and you might have Nick Robinson patting you on the head and going, what a good job you're doing. But ultimately, when it comes to the ballot box, what are the voters going to remember? Is it going to be that, you sufficiently, denigrated Jeremy Corbyn and pissed all over his legacy and, betrayed the left in your own party? Or is it going to be Boris Johnson who comes out and says, I will literally shit money in your constituency if you need me to? It's going to be the latter, because as duplicitous and as, limited as Boris Johnson is, at least he's saying something which is speaking to what people care about. He's not going, I hate the same people as you do. I hate Jeremy Corbyn just as much as you do, because he knows that doesn't speak to people. And one thing that I'll say is a point of comparison, because I'm not saying that it's not useful to refashion the party in your own image as a political leader. Boris Johnson did that very successfully when he removed the whip from over 20 MPs, for rebelling against his Brexit deal. What that showed was clarity of purpose, but it was in service of a policy. It was in service of a policy and saying, I'm going to refashion this as a Brexit party, as a vote leave government, and here I am proving it to you. Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting, all they're doing is going, yeah, we think our party's full of shits too. And that's about it. It's not in service of a policy. It's certainly not in service of, I think, a broader strategic orientation. It's just trying to prove how sensible you are for an audience of people who are never going to vote for you.